Hi, welcome back to another video feature of the Immersive World's Handbook. Today I'm in Camden Town in London, which is a very popular and touristy part of the city, but I thought I would use this visit today to talk a little bit about the eclecticism and style that certainly highlights many of the storefronts that you'll see if you visit this intriguing and eclectic part of London. So let's take the tour. Okay, let's begin the tour today here in Camden, and I'm giving you some voiceover here and combining some of my still shots from some recent visits in 2018, and also giving you some materials that will maybe put into context, I think, just the interest in Camden. This is not intended as a full-fledged research project, more or less just a recollection of some of the interesting things about Camden. If you Google Camden on the internet, you find, I think, a lot of images like this where it shows you the storefronts, it shows you the eclectic boot shops, the subcultural influences, the interesting architecture, the interesting design on the interior of shops. And for me, it's one of the most exciting things about Camden is this sense of visual eclecticism that connects to, as Dick Hebdige has written about in Subculture, the meaning of style, the various subcultural influences. Also connects, I think, to lifestyle and alternative lifestyle. And something important for us to remember is this emphasis on lifestyle in a contemporary age in which we're being influenced more and more by brands, we're being influenced by consumerism and that desire of people trying to be the same, or advertisers and commercial brand organizations telling us that we should try to be the same. And so I think what Camden tries to keep alive is some of that spirit that we see in subcultures. A lot of the popular press has written about this very issue and has focused on why Camden has maintained this influence and how it continues to draw tourists over the years. As you can see here from this article, walking through Camden Market is like being transported into another world. Talks just about some of the areas and discusses here at the end of that paragraph the mix of subcultural stalls, including goth, burlesque, cyber, clubwear, punk, hippie, ethnic, Japanese gothic, Lolita, fetish, create your own designs, and so forth. And that's, for me, one of the most exciting things about Camden is that we can have the coexistence of these various subcultures. And I think that's one of the reasons that it has maintained such a hold on our collective imagination, and when we visit, we often want to go to Camden because of that very fact. And as this article here is saying, alternative people come here because it's where the alternative shops are. So that sense that people can seek out what interests them in terms of their desire to live a lifestyle, their desire to dress a certain way, to have a particular fashion, to visually represent their politics or lifestyle on their bodies and through their clothing and accoutrements in various ways, I think is what makes Camden interesting to so many people. As you can see here, there are a series of articles talking about people being forced out. The feeling maybe is that there are too many food stalls. Other people talk about gentrification, that process by which an area becomes more popular, and then people who live there or people who sell things there or want to shop there in terms of retail have to either pay more rents on their apartments, they have to pay more to sell their goods in their shops, and then if you're a person coming through, you have to pay more because of that increase that's happening at the level of the retailer. And indeed, a lot of articles have focused on this idea that the cultural heart of London in Camden has died because of some of these influences. It's another example here from Vice UK. Camden, the alternative culture of London, capital of London, is being gentrified. And so this is really getting into that issue of what happens when other cultural or economic influences take over. This article is suggesting, profiling Cyberdog, and be sure to check out my short video on Cyberdog, suggesting that there is a possibility to maintain these subcultural influences even with these other forces coming to play. You just saw an article there about the history of Camden, and then this is talking about the creative underclass. It's actually an academic article talking about the influences in Camden in terms of subcultures. So if we start to think of a series of trends or themes, why Camden, I think, works so well, one is to say that it really does flow with style. To go back to my earlier point about Googling images, if you Google Camden, you see images like these of the eclectic storefronts, of offerings that you can't find in other parts of the city, of just really interesting visual displays that capture, I think, some of the essence of why Camden is so exciting to people. And these are a few of my images that I shot from my visit in 2018. And I thought maybe it would just be interesting to show these and to simply take them in. While there are these alternative displays of material culture and architectural design in and outside of shops, you also see, I think just down here is a Starbucks at one of the locks. So it's interesting to think that there are these influences coming in, and then at the same time there are these shops that maintain that emphasis on style that is alternative in nature. And really, I think it reminds us of the importance of eclecticism as it relates to a place like Camden. I think a lot of traditional venues of retail, such as shopping malls, often we don't see eclecticism. We see stores that are brands, and nothing against brands, but sometimes brands are not enjoyed by people who want to march to the beat of a different drummer in terms of their personal style, in terms of their politics, their lifestyle choices. And as a result of that, I think some people would appreciate Camden or similar places around the world where there's this emphasis on alternative subcultures. Berlin certainly comes to mind in terms of a place that also has, I think, opportunities for people to really take in and be a part of alternative subcultures and lifestyles. And I have this image here actually of Las Vegas just to emphasize that a lot of times when you're traveling to any number of cities around the world, you're confronted with something like this, right? Where it's very standardized. Someone is selling you a t-shirt for 99 cents or 4 for $9.99 or whatever it happens to be. So I think Camden stands in opposition to that sort of tendency that we see in a lot of popular culture when we're traveling worldwide, where we see a lot of homogenization and sameness as opposed to the celebration of eclecticism that I think so many people appreciate when they come to Camden. And here are a few more of the images I took from the storefronts. And then we can move on and talk about another trend that I think makes Camden so exciting, and that is that subcultural influence that I talked about when I discussed this earlier in the video. If you read folks like Dick Hebdish, if you read people who study subcultures, they will point to the fact that subcultures really provide opportunities to push mainstream society. And I think what you see in Camden is a visual representation of that energy. And if you talk to any number of people who live a certain lifestyle, they then would, I think, pass on to you that significance as they express it in their own life decisions, in their performances, in their music, in their approaches to fashion, their political ideals, and so forth. And so I think Camden has that potential really to give us that push, and it's happening in this sense we're traveling to a part of a city and hopefully you can take some of that in. Now I think some people would argue, as that previous article did, that the Camden subculture that maybe people liked 20, 30 years ago is starting to fade. But I would argue you could look at places like Cyberdog pictured here, which caters to the EDM, rave scene, and so forth, that it really does maintain some of that energy. If you walk through the store, and I encourage you to visit it, I encourage you to look at what they offer online in terms of their images and visual representations. You can also check out my video. But I would make the claim that they are doing something quite significant in keeping alive these traditions. Here are some additional images, both from the area near Camden and also Spitalfields, which is a place near where I stayed the last time I went to London. And you also just see, I think, that emphasis on outdoor art and that whole scene, which is so popular, particularly in Berlin, if you get a chance to go to Berlin and take in some of the great street art there. Okay, and the next tendency we can look at as we look at another one of my images from my visit is the non-corporate focus. And this is something that I think is particularly significant because we live in an age, as I said earlier, in which everywhere we go on our travels, we're confronted with like the corporate focus. And there's that image I was speaking of earlier of the Starbucks just outside one of the locks there. And so we're aware of this, right? If we're interested, I think, in avoiding corporate and branded influences, it becomes harder and harder. This is a themed restaurant I saw in Camden, which kind of had like a pretty high-end look to it. I didn't visit it. It wasn't open during my visit, which was during the morning, but I sort of wondered like what's going on here and how is this, connecting with the rest of Camden. And this is just outside that same restaurant. And it just raises questions about whether these different forces can coexist in an eclectic place like Camden. Here is the Serial Killer Cafe. And I know that some people write online about the Serial Killer Cafe and say that it has this branded corporate influence on people because, quite obviously, they're selling all the various cereals that you might want to enjoy if that's your thing, eating sweet cereals. And so I think it just raises questions for all of us to think about in terms of these alternative venues that we might find in various parts of the world. And Berlin would be another place to look in terms of how things are changing specifically. The video you might check out that I've done in Berlin is on the Bikini Berlin Mall, which I've argued in that work that it is an alternative mall, particularly because of how it approaches its interior spaces in terms of the eclectic offerings and so forth, but a much different scale, a much different project than what we see in Camden. So I will bring the video to close with an additional outro here from Camden when I visited, and we'll call this video to a close today. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video feature today, talking about some of the many eclectic stylistic aspects of Camden Town as we tour today here in London. So please come back for additional video features of the Immersive World's Handbook.